Good morning, dear students of class 12. Welcome to this English online class. We are going to take up part 2 of the lesson, The Rat Trap, lesson 4 from your Flamingo by this lesson by Selma Legaloff. So let's briefly recap what we did in yesterday's class. We discussed about this rat trap seller who made his living by selling rat traps. But this did not give him sufficient uh, money to meet his daily needs. So he sometimes compromised with his principles and resorted to begging or petty thefts. His condition was very pitiable. His clothes were in rags, his cheeks were sunken, and hunger always gleamed in his eyes. One day, during such uh, trudgings, wanderings, he struck upon a very wild idea, a very wild line of thought which entertained him. And this was that he compared the whole world to a rat trap. Uh, just like in a rat trap, cheese and pork, they are offered as bait to lure the rats. In the same way, world offers its riches to lure people, to tempt people, and people get tempted by these worldly possessions, and that is their end. And seeing people uh, falling into the prey gave him lot of sadistic pleasure. So one day, uh, while selling his rat traps, wandering, he got late and he decided to take shelter in a house. He knocked at the door, but the, not expecting a shelter, but just asking for shelter. Probably he never expected someone to give him a place to stay for the night. But then, to his surprise, the person who was an old man, an old crofter, not only allowed him to stay in his house, but shared his porridge and played a game of majolis with him and also shared his tobacco. So he treated him like a perfect guest, and the crofter became the perfect host. The crofter went to the extent of sharing his deep secrets with him, the, the 30 kroners that he had saved. And he also showed him the place where he had saved these 30 kroners. Probably the reason why he shared with him all his secrets was the crofter himself was leading a very lonely life. He was staying all alone, and he was too happy to receive a guest that night with whom he could share, he could talk. But the rat trap peddler, he betrayed the trust of the crofter. The next morning, when they both went out, crofter for his work and peddler, he also left the house. He returned back and he stole his 30 kroners. At this point, we had stopped the lesson yesterday. So we'll continue. As he walked along with the money in his pocket, he was quite pleased with his smartness. So it gave him momentary happiness because he had acted smartly and had betrayed the trust of the crofter. He had very smartly taken away his 30 kroners. He realized, of course, that at first he dared not continue on the public highway for the fear of getting caught. So he took the road into the woods, into the forest. During first hours, this caused him no difficulty. It was just a smooth go for him. Later in the day, it became worse, for it was a big and confusing forest which he had gotten into. He tried to be sure to walk in a definite direction, but the paths twisted back and forth so strangely. He walked and walked without coming to the end of the wood. and finally he realized he had been walking around in the same forest. So he was lost in the forest. All at once he recalled his thoughts about the world and the rat trap. Now his own turn had come. He had let himself be fooled by a bait that had been caught. So the crofter had given the bait, he realized, of 30 kroners by showing him where he had saved, and he had fallen into his trap by stealing the 30 kroners. So he had also fallen into the rat trap. The whole forest, with its trunks, branches, its thicket, fallen logs, closed it upon him like an impenetrable prison from which he could never escape. So he considered the whole forest, the thick forest, like a prison from where there was no escape. It was late in December, darkness was already descending over the forest. This increased the danger and increased also his gloom and despair. It was dark, just walking in the forest was full of dangers, and this made him feel sad, and he was worried also. Finally, he saw no way out and he sank down on the ground, tired to death. He was extremely exhausted, so exhausted that he felt almost dying, thinking that his last moment had come. But just as he laid his head on the ground, he heard a sound, a regular thumping. There was no doubt as to what that was. He raised himself. Those are the hammer strokes from an iron mill. So he could hear clearly the hammer strokes from an iron mill. So iron mill would be nearby, and there he could find persons who could offer him help. He thought there must be people nearby. He summoned all his strength. Summoned means called up. He gathered all his strength, got up, and staggered in the direction of the sound. He was so tired that he could not walk properly. He was almost falling, staggering. The Ramjos iron works, which are now closed down, were not so long ago a large plant with smelter, rolling mill, and forge. In the summer time, long lines of heavily loaded barges and scows slid down the canal, which led to a large inland lake, and in the winter time, the roads near the mill were black from all the coal dust which sifted down from the big charcoal crates. So the Ramjos iron mill and works was a place where a lot of work used to go on of smeltering, rolling mill, and during one of the long dark evenings just before Christmas, the master smith and his helper sat in the dark forge near the furnace, waiting for the pig iron which had been put in the fire to be ready to be put on the anvil. Every now and then one of them got up to stir the glowing mass with a long iron bar, returning in a few moments dripping with perspiration, though, as was the custom, he wore nothing but a long shirt and a pair of wooden shoes. So, in iron mill, work was going on near the furnace, and Master Smith was there along with his helper, and they were out of labor, they were dripping with perspiration, sweat, and all the time there were many sounds to be heard in the forge. The big bellows groaned and the burning coal cracked. The five boys shoveled charcoal into the mouth of the furnace with a great deal of clatter. So the fire boy was putting charcoal into the furnace, and which was producing lot of sound. Outside roared the waterfall, and a sharp north wind whipped the rain against the brick tiled forest roof. So even outside there was the sound of the waterfall, and north wind was blowing. It was probably on account of all this noise that the blacksmith did not notice that a man had opened the gate and entered the forge until he stood close up to the furnace. Surely it was nothing unusual for poor vagabonds without any better shelter for the night to be attracted to the forge by the glow of light, which escaped through the sooty panes, and to come in to warm themselves in front of the fire. So the blacksmith hardly noticed him as he entered, because many people came, many wanderers, vagabonds, Aimless wanderers came to take shelter in this place for the night. The blacksmith glanced only casually. He looked only casually, indifferently at the intruder. Intruder here is the uh, rat trap peddler. Intruder uh, who has uh, who had a stranger who had entered the place, and the blacksmith did not take any notice of him, just looked at him. He looked the way people of his type usually did, with a long beard, dirty, ragged, and with a bunch of rat traps dangling on his chest. Yeah, dangling, hanging on his chest. So he was like any other man without any identity. So blacksmith looked at him but hardly paid any attention. He asked permission to stay, and the master blacksmith nodded a hearty consent without honoring him with a single word. So the rat trap peddler asked permission to stay, but the master smith, the blacksmith, did not say yes, neither said no. And he kept mum. The tramp did not say anything either. He had not come there to talk, but only to warm himself and sleep. So the tramp even did not say anything, because his purpose was to just warm himself and sleep, but he had not come there to talk. In those days, the Ramjo's iron mill was owned by a very prominent ironmaster. Very prominent, well-known ironmaster owned the Ramjo's iron mill, whose greatest ambition was to ship good iron to the market. He watched both night and day to see the work was done as well as possible, and at this moment he came into the forge on one of his nightly rounds of inspection. So this owner, the ironmaster, had come there on his night round of inspection. Naturally, the first thing he saw was the tall ragamuffin who had eased his way so close to the furnace that steam rose from his wet rags. He noticed this peddler, who was very close to the furnace, so close that the steam was coming out from his wet rags. The ironmaster did not follow the example of the blacksmith. What example did the blacksmith showed? By just keeping quiet, by not taking any notice of the peddler. But the ironmaster did not do like this, who had hardly deigned to look at the stranger. He walked close up to him, looked him over very carefully, then tore off his slouch hat to get a better view of his face. He came very close, he looked down, he took off his hat so that he could see him clearly. And what did he say? But of course it's you, Niels Olof. He addressed the peddler by a name, Niels Olof. How you do look? How are you looking? The man with the rat traps had never before seen the ironmaster at Ramjo's, and did not even know what his name was. But it occurred to him that if the fine gentleman thought he was an old acquaintance, he might perhaps throw him a couple of krona. Again the grief in the peddler, because he had never seen the ironmaster. But then, what was the harm if he kept quiet? If the ironmaster took him to be an old known person. Acquaintance is somebody you know. So probably uh, the ironmaster had thought him to be his known person by the name of Niels Olof. And if he kept quiet, probably he would get some money in the form of charity. There he did not want to undeceive him at all. Yes, God knows things have gone downhill with me. And he replied, yes, things have not been fine with me. You should not have resigned from the regiment. The ironmaster further communicated, you should not have resigned from the regiment. That was the mistake. If only I had still been in the service at the time, it would not